The Think Small podcast presents The Offshore Diaries, where business growth has no borders.
Welcome, everybody. We are back again for another episode of The Offshore Diaries. This is Paulo Santos, one of your hosts here. Today, we have kind of a unique individual coming onto our podcast. It's not a VA. We're not somebody in the Philippines, but we have somebody that has some different kinds of experiences working with the VA industry in different locations. Bhargavi Sahu, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Paula. I'm really excited to be here.
Bhargavi, where are you currently working now?
So right now, we can get into it, but right now I'm located in Manhattan, New York, where I'm working as in sales for a health tech startup.
Nice. Now, you and I didn't meet while you were in that role. We met in a much different environment. Previously, you were working at a software development, Salesforce.com development house in Jersey. And that's really where our paths intersected. I was consulting for a project that you were managing internally for the team there. And that's where we were able to kind of work together on a project for the first time. You came to mind when I was thinking of people to get on the show because you have a very unique background. Obviously, no guessing you're not a white American, but you were raised here, right? You were raised here. So what is your background?
So a little bit about myself. I'm a first generation Indian American. Growing up, I always felt like I had one foot in two worlds. So my parents moved here in the early 2000s with, the normal immigrant story, with almost nothing, right? Their journey really shaped how I see opportunities and challenges. I grew up in Central Jersey where we met right outside of Princeton University, and then went to a great high school there. And then I headed over to Philadelphia to a college on a scholarship. Eventually, I kicked off my career in New Jersey at the Salesforce partner company. And right now I'm in New York, living the New York dream.
That's pretty cool. So you're first generation. So just to clarify, you were born here or born there?
So technically, I was like 6 months old when we came over here, but I am a citizen. I grew up here.
You're as American as can be.
Yes.
No accent whatsoever. And everything else. So let's talk about your past role where we did meet, because I think that was a very unique place for you to be working. That was owned by an American Pakistani. Is that right?
Bangladesh.
Bangladesh,
Yes.
Bangladesh. I'm sorry.
Same area though.
I'm close in my brain. So, but it was a very unique environment because you had a lot of other Indians. You had some other people from Bangladesh, from other, countries from that region. But you also had a large remote staff team from India, Bangladesh, the Philippines, and South Africa, I believe, as well. And probably a couple other places mixed in with your current team that was local in New Jersey, right? And you worked with across the board. Right. So I that's really what we want to talk about today. Is really talking about some of those things, some of those different virtual and remote workers that you guys had, and especially the cultural differences. Especially you being an Indian American, more American with one foot in the door here, and Indian with a foot in the door in that culture. A foot in that culture. But really talking about the nuances of working remotely with the different cultures and your experiences with them, because you were able to work with them directly. Right. So just before we get into some specific details, did you enjoy working with virtual people, considering that was the first time you worked with that? Or did you feel like it was kind of just a weird thing overall? Forget Indian or Filipino, just overall, just the virtual remote world.
Truthfully, I loved it. I loved how everyone brought their own perspectives from their culture. It was a very enriching experience. And I think that each culture, like you mentioned, I worked with VAs from Philippines, South Africa, India even. So everyone brought their own unique strengths, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think I'm very grateful for that opportunity to work with people from different backgrounds. I found the experience to be very enriching. Each culture I worked with, some of the ones you named, like the Philippines, South Africa, and India, everyone brought their own perspectives and their own background to to the workplace, and I was able to really connect and learn about different ways of communication and collaboration from that experience.
So from the Philippines, what kind of workers did you guys have from the Philippines? What were their roles like?
They had their hands in a lot of roles. There was mainly, I think it was mainly administrative and project coordination roles, but that's not to say we also didn't have some team members working more on the technical side of things, utilizing, the
different tools and stuff that you guys were
tools,
using. Yeah.
yes.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So a lot of companies that I've spoken to at least, have really bad misconceptions about working anything remotely at all. Not just remotely offshore, just remotely, period. Right?
Okay.
Did that change anything? Did your experience there give you any kind of undo any misconceptions about remote workers and virtual staff overseas?
So this was my first experience working with remote workers, so I didn't have any misconceptions or ideas coming into it. However, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that virtual assistants from other parts of the world might need a little bit more hand-holding, and they might not be as productive as in-house employees. I think that's completely false. In reality, I think VAs are often more proactive and resourceful just because they are grateful for the opportunity. They bring a lot of expertise and efficiency to the table. So I think it's really just about from the beginning having a clear sense of communication with them, and that's a good tone for the work environment.
Okay, here comes some of the dirtier questions, right? So, did you find communicating with one of the cultures, the Bangladesh group or the Indian group versus the Philippine group, different in any way? Better, worse, just different?
Different, yes. Sometimes. I think it's important I think it comes down to an individual level. I think each person has their own strengths and weaknesses. Just from my experience, though, I do feel like Filipino professionals have another level of emotional intelligence and warmth. And it was a very enriching experience working with them because they also taught me a lot about how to communicate directly.
Listen,
and also,
you are totally fine to just say Filipinos are awesome. It's totally okay in this podcast. I'm not going to bash you for it.
No, I mean, that's, in short, that's what it is. But also other cultures, they taught me different things as well as how to, problem solve and brainstorm. And so not one or the other that I prefer to work with. I think there's different strengths in each group that I was able to kind of take away from.
Got it. Filipinos have this role, this misconception role that they're a very submissive, very shy, very, not laid back, but kind of just very service oriented mindset all the time. Did you find that the case? And was that a good thing? Was it a bad thing? Was it annoying? Or, how did was that the case for you?
That's an interesting question. Again, I think it's important to remember that each individual is unique. But to your point, I do think if there's any tendency at all, it's definitely that they lean a little bit more polite and not wanting to say no, which, as you know, can sometimes lead to misunderstandings about timeline. But I think, again, with a good, open communication style and a supportive environment, that these challenges are easily overcome. And it wasn't anything that stood out too prominently. I just think that's a good problem to have.
Got it. Do you work with any remote workers today in your current position?
Right now, we do have a team overseas in India and a little bit in Europe, but yeah, mainly India.
Okay. How is that? So we talked about a little bit about the VAs in the Philippines and stuff like that, and your current work with them. Working with the Indian groups and VAs that you do now and in your past role, right? Do you see any challenges? Are they better skilled in specific things? Are they less skilled in specific things? How have you kind of dealt with that, or what have you seen and experienced in that?
Yeah, so the group of individuals they work with in India, they're not technically VAs. They have they're dispersed across different organizations at the company. So it's a very hard comparison to make. I think because again, we have some individuals in sales, so they have, those individuals are strongly suited in communication. We have some doing more engineering type work. But yeah, I think overall, working with anybody across seas has its own set of challenges. One of them being, as you know, the time zones.
Right.
But there's that.
Okay. Having worked with remote workers yourself, and also being a female minority yourself, working with Americans in various roles at your past company, do you feel like they also need to be guided on how to interact with these different cultures a bit, because because of that cultural gap that you're able to bridge in many ways because of your background?
Yeah. I think, growing up in the South Asian diaspora, I've always felt like a duality. Growing up in the US, being very Americanized, but also holding up like traditional Indian values or even Eastern values. So that helps me. It's an advantage in a sense because it kind of shapes how I communicate, how I lead, and how I interpret respect, time, and confrontation. So there is that cultural gap there about, how do you communicate from someone if you've never been there, if you never experienced their culture? How do you speak to them about confrontation? Because each culture, deals with that differently. So I think that's a very important aspect to take note if you are working alongside colleagues in another part of the world.
No, definitely, because I think even if you're born there or even born here, right, you still got parents that you grew up with. You still have circles of families that were kind of influencing you, that teaches you these cultures, that is kind of pounded into you.
Right.
And you understand when, and I'll be blunt about it. Most of the VAs in the Philippines, their clientele are middle-aged white men, right? You have a middle-aged white man looking down at a 5-foot-tall Filipino girl, they're intimidated. They're intimidated, right? So, given them the nuance of, okay, maybe you don't want to scare the crap out of your VAs. You don't want to intimidate them. You want to work with them, work with their skills and work with their personality types. It's hard to do if you don't know what those personalities are, or you weren't raised with them, or, you weren't around those things. So I do believe that there's that little bit of culture gap that needs to be met along the way. All right, I'm going to ask you the personal question, because you have an Indian background. Is the accent a challenge more for the Indians versus the Filipinos that you've worked with?
Do you mean the accent? Can you kind of clarify?
Yeah, I remember years ago when the call centers all started flooding to India, and 5 years later they were all in the Philippines. Right. And a lot of it was because of this cultural gap. I'm sorry, this gap with the accents overall that a lot of Americans couldn't get over. Right. Do you think that's something that like the Indian VAs, specifically remote workers, should be working on? Or do we really think it's not really a challenge?
I think I'm very fit to answer that question, just because I don't have an Indian accent. However, a lot of my extended family might have that, right? So I understand, I hear it, and I can understand it, but it's important in the large scale of things to work on it. In short, work on it. But then again, like you mentioned, it's been kind of relocated over to the Philippines, the majority of it. And I think that's done for a reason, because I think Filipinos, they have I wouldn't say they don't have an accent, but they have a little bit more of a similar accent or a easier to understand accent. I think comes down to the language that they speak in India and how they naturally speak. And so that comes out, even if they're speaking like proper English, and they are, they get that educational background, it's still something that I think with a little bit of effort can be worked on.
Well, it's funny, from the Filipino standpoint, after the call centers started coming to the country, there's colleges that actually don't allow anything but English to be spoke on campus since, right? Like, it's been a high level thing. And personally, I have kind of this double-edged belief about it. Like, it's great because it helps them get better jobs in many ways. At the same time, I also feel like we lose our culture as a country and as a nation at the same time. I get it. And I do understand, especially for outbound sales and customer service roles, hearing an Indian accent on the phone when somebody cold calls you is like 99 out of 100 times it's a quick hang up. Filipinos maybe like 95 out of 100 times, but it's that little bit of an advantage sometimes that helps the Philippines get those roles, especially on the outbound sales and customer service phone speaking things. You also had a unique environment and situation where your past company actually brought over Filipinos from the Philippines to actually work in the office physically. Was there a benefit for that?
Yes, absolutely. And this kind of ties into, the return to office orders. in general, if you have a workplace rooted in person, it allows for more immediate real-time communication. It allows for better problem solving. You also get to understand how people work, their workflows. And then especially with having the Filipinos come over, it was a very culturally enriching opportunity. With the cultural exchange, we often celebrated different holidays of the people in the company. So
you guys love parties, by the way. You guys love parties. There's a party for everything and anything you can imagine, which is great.
Yeah, so I think definitely having them in person, it really allows to build meaningful relationships, and those parties as well.
That's cool. Was there any challenges to having them in person?
No, I wouldn't say so. I would say the more the merrier.
More the merrier. Okay, cool. Which is interesting because coming up in a very future episode, we actually have a human resources immigration attorney from the U.S. speaking about bringing immigrants over on visas to work here and why it's not always recommended, and the really risks and challenges from the corporation side and the immigration side of things. So that that's an upcoming episode for us. Thank you for your time on this. This has been very cool. I think from the VAs from the Philippines, who are a majority of our audience, hearing from somebody who's worked with both the Indian constituents and the Filipino community really opens up a lot of conversations in the future. It's funny because if you look at the VAs in the Philippines, the remote workers in India, we're fighting for the same business in many ways. You're right. You're fighting for the same clients. Mostly they want U.S. clients or foreign clients, obviously, but they come with challenges and pros on both sides of the equation, right? I'm not gonna pretend that the Indian population is not better than the Philippines from a technical standpoint all day long, right? I will also say that I do believe that the Filipino community, based on which is like emotional intelligence, are a much warmer culture to work with in many ways, right? And that creates a lot of different things. And maybe it's just a scenario of which roles should we be going for as a community or not going for, right? And I think you brought a lot of stuff to the table. Bhargavi, this has been great. Thank you so much. And we will, hopefully talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you again for having me, Paulo. I think this was a really insightful conversation that we had.
Thanks, everybody. We'll talk soon.
The Think Small podcast presents The Offshore Diaries, where business growth has no borders.